The following episode includes discussion of sexual assault, domestic violence, the anti-violence movement, and other sensitive topics. These topics are being discussed solely for the purpose of learning about one story. Hey guys, welcome back to Panic Button Podcast, where we talk about mental health, how we figure it out, why we figure it out, and just everything that we want to talk about, I guess. I don't even know where I was going with that. I've said this so many times to you guys that I'm just tired of talking to myself at this point. But mental health check-in. How we doing? Hope everybody has had a great week so far. And honestly, I'm still complaining about the weather because I swear 1 minute it's -10 and the next minute we're 50 degrees. So my theory is everyone's about to get crazy sick. We're gonna just get crazy sick because we're not gonna know why the temperature is out of whack and it's gonna throw us all out. But going off of that rant, I do appreciate the sunlight that we've been having. It makes me feel so much better, and it's so crazy what vitamin D does to your system and how great it makes you feel. So on that note, I definitely have had a better mental health week, one of the best that I've had in a while. So I hope you guys are also having a great time wherever you're at. I hope the sun is shining. And if not, it's coming, right? We have to look forward to spring and summer and everything good that comes with that. So today we do have a special guest joining our podcast. And if you don't remember her name, that's going to be a shame because we share the same name, which is awesome. And it's one of the many reasons why I do enjoy this woman. Just kidding. She's really super incredible. I'm super excited to introduce you guys to Jess Harman, whose pronouns are she, her for today. She's a queer survivor, anti-violence advocate. She's a speaker, trainer, writer, and consultant. For over a decade, she's also worked with survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and sex trafficking, as well as LGBTQIA plus individuals. Hi, that's me. People experiencing severe and persistent mental illness, and individuals impacted by substance use, people experiencing homelessness, and people living with HIV/chronic health conditions. Without further ado, Jess, are you here with us?
Hi, Jess. It's Jess.
I love it. It makes it easy, right? We're not making it difficult for people to remember. So if you take nothing away from this podcast, you could just be like, their name was Jess.
Exactly.
That was it. Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of just jumping right into it, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your mental health journey has been so far.
Well, yeah, so right now I am in grad school. I'm in my last semester of grad school. It's a 2-year program, and so I would say that over the past 2 years, my mental health varies day to day. I'm taking it day by day. Just a lot.
Wait, you mean school's not incredible and super fun?
As fun as it is sometimes. Yeah, I have come to learn that I need to cultivate a practice of saying no more in my life. Because I just am so excited about everything, that I often have a lot on my plate at any given time, and not being in grad school, that's usually manageable, but now in grad school, it's just felt really overwhelming at times.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Last week I had a little bit of a freak out of the overwhelm, but this week I am doing much better. Everything is feeling manageable. Everything is still providing me with joy and rejuvenation. So we're gonna ride the wave.
And has the sun been out there where you are?
Yes. Yeah.
See, the sun is good. We like the sun.
That definitely helps. Definitely helps.
Yeah, no, it really does. And it's kind of funny because you wouldn't think that it would be such a mood changer, but it really is.
Oh, yes.
When somebody pisses you off, it's a different level of pissed off when it's raining versus sunny. Right? Like
Yeah,
100%. Like it's like
yeah,
a better pissed off, if that makes sense. Like it's
yeah,
like, yeah, I'm pissed off, but it's sunny, so fuck you.
yeah, yeah. The outside weather conditions are like mirroring the storm inside, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So tell us a little bit more about your experience within the anti-violence movement.
Yeah, so for the past decade I have kind of done all sorts of things. I've been an advocate, providing direct services to folks. I've been a systems-based advocate, advocating for change within the different systems that survivors sometimes choose to interact with when fleeing for safety or trying to access justice. I've been a case manager, I've been a supervisor, I've been a trainer, program director, grant management, kind of uh, all of the various different things other than being at the very top of the pyramid, if you will.
Lots of hats, yeah, for sure.
Yes. So yeah, I've worked quite a bit extensively with survivors of gender-based violence. Specifically is what I've done a lot of for the past decade, but I've also had a couple stints in there, if you will, of as a HIV medical case manager. Had a caseload at one point that was primarily folks experiencing homelessness, substance use, and severe and persistent mental illness. Um, so, working with folks who've experienced trauma has always been my area of interest. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with who I am and my life experiences. And I know that we'll talk more about that, but um, yeah, kind of all over the place in terms of what I've done within the movement.
Yeah, so like for those of us that aren't very familiar with it, what is the anti-violence movement?
Yeah, so in another world, I tell people that if I had not gone into advocacy and anti-violence world, I actually could imagine myself being a history professor or a history teacher. I love history. I am a history nerd for sure. And so I think it just briefly I love to connect the present with the past. And so for really much of human history and long before the anti-violence movement, we can see just all sorts of numerous examples in countries all over the world, and this still exists today, of legalized, sanctioned, condoned, permissible gender-based violence. But specifically within the United States, it wasn't until the late 1800s, in like 1870, 1871, when Alabama became the first state to rescind a husband's right to beat his wife. Um, and that was really the first time in U.S. history when we saw this codified into law at a state level. And it's important I think it's really important to note, though, that who had access to that law at that time period was not everybody. For instance, African Americans and Native and Indigenous Americans, they weren't legally recognized as citizens, and so they couldn't access the law at that time. So really, that law pertained specifically to white women, that they could no longer be beaten. And then over time, through the rest of the 1800s into the 1900s, we see more states adopting those laws, but it wasn't really until the 60s and 70s when we have the kind of the creation of what we consider to be the anti-violence movement. Um, so like 100 years later, pretty much from that first law in Alabama. And so the anti-violence movement was really born out of the civil rights movement happening parallel to the second wave feminist movement and activism in the United States. And so what started as like grassroots organizing or like phone tree community networks of support, or literally women taking women into their homes when they needed to flee, to have a safe place to stay, um, that then kind of into the 70s and 80s, we see the movement really clearly defined into two different lanes. And one was continuing along that grassroots community care path. And then the other, specifically, I want to note, the other, led by white feminists, merged into the criminal legal system world to attempt to create systemic accountability for offenders. Um, and so I think that within the modern anti-violence movement today, that a lot of folks who are kind of newly joining don't know this history of our movement. And so that's why I wanted to highlight that really the reason for why survivor safety and survivor justice and offender accountability is so centrally located within the criminal legal system is because of those white feminists who wanted to access and use the same power which had been weaponized against them. And in parallel to that, like I mentioned in that other lane, you've got Black folks and African American folks and Native and Indigenous and Asian Pacific Islanders saying that's not for us. The legal system has never been for us, never intended for us. And so they, for way, way, way longer, have had their own restorative and transformative systems of accountability and justice. But we see that history still present today, where when you look at the organizations at the national level, at state levels, at local levels, we see that they're separated either by racial identity groups or kind of more recently by like sexual orientation, where we have a few popping up that are like specific to LGBTQ victim survivors. But we see like orgs dedicated to Black African American survivors, or to Hispanic Latina survivors, or Native Indigenous survivors, Asian American Pacific Islander survivors. And it's only kind of been more recently that that white mainstream anti-violence movement has started to learn about those restorative and transformative systems of accountability and justice, and started to question the path that they took. So that is all what I mean by the anti-violence movement. That's easy to remember, right?
Yeah, I wrote that all down. I got it. It's stored right up here. And
Yeah, there'll be a quiz later.
no, and honestly, as you were talking, I'm just like, holy shit, like this is really interesting. And I don't mean that sarcastically. It's just like something that you don't think about every day. And
Yeah.
it's real and it's going on. And that's why I wanted you on here to talk about this. And, you deal with a lot of people that have dealt with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. And I know you're a survivor yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you say, per se, like, what's like, what's the best way to kind of say this? I guess, like, how do we tie this back to our mental health? How does you being involved in this and being a survivor, like, how does this help? Does that make sense? I'm like
Yeah.
having a brain fart over here. Help me out, Jess. Come on. It's supposed to be telepathy, or we have the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
name.
So yeah, I think I can talk about my experience in the movement as someone who is a survivor, and kind of what led me to doing this as being a survivor. Um, so my undergrad degree is in women, gender, and sexuality studies and history. As I mentioned, other world history. That's because I started my undergrad as being history, took my first women's studies class, and then as I've joked, the rest is history from there. I had the fire lit under my butt when I realized things that I didn't know about inequity, gender inequity. And so within that undergrad program, I had taken a class, I think it was my sophomore year. Yeah. I think it was the spring or the fall semester of my sophomore year. And um, I think I think fate was kind of aligned, if we believe in fate. That at the same time I was taking a women in violence class, my best friend, who had been my best friend since middle school. She and I, we did not go to the same college. She went to a different college, but we still were chatting every day and remaining friends. And she had shared with me that she had been sexually assaulted at the university that she was going to, and that happened the same, I think, happening while I was in that class and learning about sexual violence and sexual assault, and learning about the different dynamics, both in terms of kind of institutional societal responses, and um, learning about justice, and learning about just survivors' experiences, was really eye opening for me, because that was the first time in my life at that point, up until that point, that anyone that I knew had experienced something like that. And so it rocked my world. And I responded like I think a lot of people do, understandably so, that, for the people in our lives, a lot of us are like mama bear, where we will go to bat for the people who we love, who we care about. And so
Absolutely.
I did not respond in a great way, but I think I responded in the way that probably most people would, which is that I told her, I'm going to come and get you. I'm going to drive the 15 hours or 17 hours, and I'm going to come and get you, and I'm going to bring you back home so that way I can like protect you. Um, and she was like, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that, but I'll be home in a couple of weeks. And I was like, okay, fine. And so I remember that after that, she came to my apartment, and I had prepared for the visit by like going around my college campus and community, and like collecting brochures and things for like the sexual assault center and for therapy. And so like when she came over, I had this stack of brochures for her. Um, and when she left, I noticed that she left the stack of brochures. And so I thought like, oh, she just forgot these. I'll make sure that I get them to her the next time she comes over. And so she comes over again. I'm like, hey, you forgot these. And she leaves again, and she forgets them. And luckily, I'm not dense enough to think, oh, she forgot again, and we're going to keep doing this thing. Luckily, I was like, okay, maybe she's leaving them on purpose. and
No.
maybe. And so I just had such a hard time wrapping my brain around, why would she not want my help? And so I myself called the 24/7 crisis hotline of the local rape crisis center and was like, look, here's the deal. What's going on? What am I missing? And I will forever and always remember the advice that that person gave to me, which is that, sometimes survivors um, can decide to move forward with seeking help, seeking healing, whatever it is, justice, days after something happens like this. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months, sometimes it's years, sometimes it's never. But the important thing is that they be the one to make that choice, and
Sure.
that we can't force that. And so having that experience while I was simultaneously in that women in violence class just really, I think, cemented what I was meant to do, and what I was good, and what I made that's when I made the choice. This is the direction of my life. That I want to learn how to do this right, and I want to help. And so from that point on, I ended up volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. I joined a student group on campus that was like the gender equality group, and Eventually then got a job at a domestic violence shelter, and it's been from there. And um, it really, so what catapulted me into the movement was not actually me being a survivor. It was my friend's experience that got me into it. And it wasn't until I started working at that domestic violence shelter and I saw what is a very popular teaching tool and handout, and something that perhaps folks are familiar with, called the power and control wheel. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I wish I did.
No, that's all right. Essentially, it's this infographic that describes the different types of coercive control tactics, or like different types of abuse that people use to maintain power and control over someone else.
Oh, okay.
And so when I saw that for the first time, when I think I was still volunteering. Yeah, I hadn't gotten a job there yet. I was volunteering. I was like, whoa. This seems familiar. And so that was when I realized. So I had already been in the movement and didn't even realize I was a survivor yet. That I realized that I had an experience of domestic violence. Um, and then, unfortunately, some years later, I was sexually assaulted. And I actually have been sexually assaulted a couple times by different people. And so those experiences weren't quite as uh, at those experiences of sexual assault were very clear to me in terms of knowing and recognizing what had happened. Weren't quite as eye-opening as that aha moment with the power and control wheel. um, but all of that happened while I was in the anti-violence movement. And to a certain extent, I know it's going to be weird to say this, but I feel kind of lucky and grateful that that was the case. And I say that because I was surrounded by people who got it, who knew what I had experienced was what it was, who provided validation and support and empathy and things. And I have worked with so many survivors throughout my career who were abused, assaulted, what have you, and that was not the reaction from their community. So many survivors all throughout the world, not just in the United States, are met with disbelief and invalidation, and sometimes even more like shunning of their communities, or discrimination, or violence, and them saying that they have survived something like this, like gender-based violence. And so, to a certain extent, I felt um, weirdly grateful that those took place while I was surrounded by that community, and that also provided, or it resulted in, kind of a weird, unique, well, I don't know how unique, but oh, a situation that I really struggled to deal with for years of my career, and kind of only over maybe the past 4 years, 5 years, have I been able to figure out an alternative. And what I'm talking about is that um, there, I think even still to this day, there exists this idea within the anti-violence movement that if you yourself are a survivor and you want to be, or you are working at these different agencies, that there's this perception of, well, or there's this question, I should say, of, well, are you ready for this? And I think that there's a lot of overlap of this phenomena within the other worlds of mental health, of if you are struggling with mental health, are you the best person to work with people who are experiencing mental illness?
Right.
Or if you at some point in your life have struggled with substance use, are you the best, most qualified? Are you ready to work with people who are using substances? That there's this question of um oh like uh readiness or aptitude, I guess you
Right.
could say. And so for a long time, I didn't really tell a whole lot of people other than the folks who I worked most closely with, who I had good relationships with, who I trusted. Didn't really tell a whole lot of people that I was a survivor. Um, because of that fear that I would be viewed as incompetent, or that
Sure.
fear that would come,
You didn't
with,
want to look down upon almost.
yes, yeah, I didn't want people to question whether I was uh, capable of doing my job. And it's a really messed up um, phenomena, I guess you could say, within the anti-violence movement, that there's actually quite a plethora of anti-violence organizations and agencies who have actual policy written that says that if you're going to work here, you need to not be in an abusive relationship right now. Or if you've experienced some sort of gender-based violence, that it needs to be over a year ago, or over, however long ago. And it's really just so terribly ironic that is something that's been adopted so widely within the movement, because this movement is really founded supposedly upon these principles of survivor choice and survivor autonomy and survivor empowerment. And I can just not think of anything more disempowering than saying, I know you better than you.
Right.
Yeah, and I know
And
that you can't do this.
yeah, and honestly, like, that really gets the wheels turning because that was something you and I connected on the first time that we spoke is, you're a survivor in the field you're working in, and I'm a survivor of a mental illness. And that is what I talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I'm not anyone to a lot of people. Some of these people listening, they're like, who is she? Whatever. But if we don't have people that have survived these things that are willing to talk about it, who's going to do it? And who are we going
Mm-hmm.
to relate to? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's all that we're always concerned about is making people feel heard and making things resonate with them. And I'm sorry, I think that I do a pretty good damn job at that because I have survived anxiety, panic disorder, the list goes on and on. So if someone's going to talk about it and someone is going to be receptive to listen, I'm going to listen to the person who's done it and the
Mm-hmm.
person who's gone through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Day in and day out, 100%. And I think a lot of us can agree that you need to practice what you preach at that point. That yes, you've gone through trauma, you've gone through different instances, and that gives you power to be working in that field that you survived in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a really powerful moment last year. I was presenting at a conference, and it was the first time I'd ever presented at that conference. And I've presented at different conferences and different trainings and stuff throughout my career, within the anti-violence work that I've done. And last year was the first and only time where I have ever been given a speaker's name tag, which said my name, that I was a trainer, that I was a consultant, and that I was a survivor. That
Awesome.
Yes, I was blown away, and it was so powerful because that felt like I felt so seen and so validated by that. that not only was that something that qualified me to be speaking at that conference, that these conference organizers viewed that as something that qualified, but that was something that they wanted to celebrate by having on my name badge, which was so, there's kind of a big one that's like centrally located in the middle of my body.
It might as well give you a t-shirt at that point.
It really was that big. um, and there's something so powerful in saying that these experiences are not something that disqualify you, but qualify you to do this
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in 10 out of 10 that I would rather, again, listen to somebody who's lived through it and gone through it and survived it than talk to someone that really has no idea. I mean,
Mm.
and there's value to be heard from anybody on specific topics. You know, there's people that have studied mental health and mental disorders and this and that, but personal experience resonates a lot more than what a textbook is going to tell you.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly can. Yeah.
I wish somebody would give me a name tag. Damn it. Nobody gives me name tags.
We'll get you one.
Right. Please. I want a name tag that says, like, just listen to me. I've lived through this shit. I know what I'm talking about, damn it. Oh
Yes.
my gosh. So I guess like going off of all that, because this is some pretty heavy stuff. You
Yeah.
know, this is important and this is heavy, and I'm so grateful that you're on here and talking to us about it. But like, would you say like the mental toll has been working within the anti-violence movement as a survivor? Because you know,
Mm.
sometimes it does get a little tough to work in the field that you've survived in. Like, yes, it's powerful and it's meaningful and it gives you a level of experience that nobody could take away from you. But what does that mental toll look like as well? Because there's got to be one.
Yeah. Yeah. I being in the field and having kind of most recently been in a supervisory role, I've kind of learned that my experience, I think, is really similar to the experience of a lot of survivors who get into this movement, where there's kind of a not necessarily prescribed trajectory, but just like common trajectory, I guess. That tends to happen, and my experience is pretty resonant with it. That it took several years of being in the movement to recognize the significant impact that it was having on my mental health. That I was taking the injustices committed against the clients that I was working with and internalizing them as injustices against me. And really struggling to not take the work home, I guess you could say, and feeling just such a increased responsibility to try to help people because of the intimate knowledge that I had of what not being believed or not being supported or not having access to justice or recourse or whatever it might be, what that felt like. And so oftentimes I found myself reliving a lot of my own shit. And it was pretty, like, there's a term they call, there's a couple of different terms, and I know that there's differences between these things, but really I think there's more similarities than differences. And so we could talk about secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, whatever the term is that we want to use. That I definitely was experiencing quite a bit of that, which, just briefly, secondary or vicarious trauma is the trauma that somebody who is working with somebody who's been traumatized could potentially incur or experience through that helping dynamic. So, as someone working with trauma survivors, seeing the impact of that trauma on them can actually sometimes be traumatic on the caregiver. Um, and so definitely I was recognizing some because I was not coping in healthy ways and using substances to cope, and um, sleep disturbances and just all kinds of um, changes to my worldview, negative worldview perceptions and things, and um, realized that that was going on. And so I pivoted briefly and got into HIV case management, thinking that maybe if I cannot be quite so in it, excuse me, that might help mitigate some of those vicarious trauma, secondary trauma impacts. But what I found, excuse me, was that even though
Don't
I
pass
was in,
out on us. We need to hear this.
yeah, sorry, I've got some water. There we go. Now what I found was that in doing HIV case management, I was still finding the gender-based violence and still making that my focus. Um, and so I realized that I was not done within the gender-based violence movement, and that something needed to be different, that I needed to take my mental health more seriously. Um, and so that was when I started working at a rape crisis center, which some people might think is maybe not a good decision for helping your mental health. um, but I did, and it was very difficult work. But honestly, what made it so possible and doable and so rewarding and um, manageable for a certain period of time was the folks who I worked with. It was a small agency, and we just so closely, um, we just had a rock star team of folks where we really relied on each other. And it really reminded me, when I think about that grassroots foundation of the anti violence movement, of community care, that felt so interwoven into what we were doing. Um, and so I really do think that the way for folks to be able to sustain within the anti-violence movement is by shifting. We have so much, and I know that this is a different topic, which we can get into in a moment, of so much of our conversation within the anti-violence field. And I think this is true as well for the larger kind of mental health field, if you will. So much of our conversations around self-care, and I think that, yes, that's good. That's a conversation that's needed. People need to think about the ways they can care for themselves. And then we also need to have a bigger conversation around community care and the ways that we can support each other. That is what Native, Indigenous, and African, and Asian, and different folks of color have been saying for hundreds and hundreds of years, that the ways they have been taking care of one another is through community care. Um, we have so much to learn from that, I think, for folks who aren't part of those cultures. Um, so I think that kind of helped with my mental health for a while. And then um, stepping outside of, I've also found that kind of fluctuating between the direct service roles and then the more kind of not in direct service roles, but more supervisory trainer kind of things, that there's just been the continuous pivoting has allowed me to stay within the movement. I think is how I've mitigated that mental toll, because it does it. I was just talking about this, I think, earlier today, with someone who's a colleague and who's professionally a therapist, that um, so much of oh what I think is a way for folks to oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but it came back. That so much of the anti-violence work that I have done and that people do involves just this, like, continuous exposure to the ugliness of what people are capable of doing. And I think that that is like a really kind of easier way of defining what vicarious trauma is, one specific symptom, I should say, of vicarious trauma, that when you see so much of the ugliness of what people are capable of, you forget of the beauty that they are also simultaneously capable of. Um, and it changes your worldview. You forget about the beauty. The beauty becomes so tiny, so minuscule that it almost seems um, not real, or um, so so insignificant, and that it feels like the ugliness is reality, and it feels like the ugliness is pervasive. And so that's why I think being able to pivot to these different roles and being able to interact with different people in the community has allowed me to see to balance that perspective.
Yeah, no, that it's pretty powerful stuff. It's pretty intense to say. I'm just sitting here like just listening and honestly like just fully like blown because it's a side of things we don't usually hear about, right? Like it don't talk about it enough and we don't hear about it enough. And obviously, like you said, it has taken a mental toll on you and you've been able to make adjustments. But what do you do to take care of yourself, would you say then?
Yeah, I think that it's really a very important thing that I've that's very hard to do. Um, but saying being able to tap out, I think, is a form of self care. There's this analogy that I think of for this kind of work, which is a marathon race, but a marathon race that doesn't have a finish line, a marathon race that's unending, and that you have to figure out your form, if you will, in order to be able to ensure that you can continue, and that sometimes you take breaks, sometimes you step out to get a drink of water, sometimes you don't get back in, sometimes you wait a while and then you get back in. um, but the kind of important thing, I think, for a lot of people is that it is always available to get back in. But it's something I think a lot of people have a lot of shame and maybe a lot of ego or pride to be able to say when enough is enough for now. And that's been a very powerful thing for me to learn over recent years, is that me saying enough is enough for now is not necessarily a forever and always, and it's not an indication of failure. I think that's what keeps a lot of people in the anti-violence movement or in hard work, where folks are working in the mental health field or substance use or working in trauma, that it can feel like really shameful to say that I can't do this anymore.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and but I think that it's a recognition. And I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to say, that's enough for now." So that's been one way that I um, try to take care of myself. I've also
I mean, I
learned.
I thought you were gonna say you took a bath or something, but no,
I
no.
wish.
I
I
do
wish.
appreciate the value behind saying no. And I think that you bring up a good point that I think society wise, we're told yes, yes, yes. And that's not necessarily the best for us. Really, really focusing on setting those boundaries and putting your mental health first is the only thing that's going to help you survive. So
Mm,
you have to take back that control, and
mm.
being able to say no is the biggest control that we have.
Yeah, yeah.
And taking a bath, but
I used to joke that because I had actually been to a conference like, I don't know, probably 12 years ago or something like that, where they were talking about self care and they had proposed bubble baths. And I was like, well, what if you've already taken 4 bubble baths and you still don't feel any different?
Stay in there longer.
Yeah. No, honestly, I feel like during the COVID lockdown of 2020, when people were like having children or getting animals or starting sourdough starter kits, um,
Oh my god, that's actually funny because totally off topic. I do want to start a sourdough kit. So,
yes, it was like
yeah.
you did one of the three, it seems, for most people. And I did none of those, but what I did instead was I started getting outside every day. And I don't do that anymore. I wish I had the time for that. But I started to get outside every day and developed a new relationship with nature that I had never really had so intimately before. And I do think that it was in part because of, us all living in fear that we're going to die at any point because of COVID. Uh,
Right.
that
Don't
it,
look don't look at the sun directly.
it makes you appreciate things a little bit more when we're having to um, live in lockdown. And so getting outside and being in nature now, I mean, that's just been something that has continued to be so rejuvenating to me. Because when I'm in nature, I realize that the world is so much bigger than me and whatever it is that I'm mad about that day, because usually I'm mad about something or another every day.
Oh,
All you
same.
need to do is read the news.
Exactly, right? Something will piss you off. Like I said, as long
Yes,
as you're getting pissed off when it's sunny, we're okay.
exactly. Yeah, and I tended to not go outside if it was raining, at least for long periods of time. And so, yeah, I that has just been such a game changer for my mental health and well being since
So do you
2020.
like to go hiking?
Yes, yeah, hiking, camping, backpacking, kayaking, canoeing, just anything I can
Oh,
do
you're
to.
doing all the outside things.
Yes, I love it. I That's definitely my best way of spending a
Taking care
weekend.
of yourself. Yeah.
Yes, and taking care of myself. Yeah.
I feel like I want to go camping, but it would turn into glamping, and I don't
Hey,
think that that's
that's fine.
necessarily hitting the point.
Honestly, I think being outside is the only thing, And so however comfortable you want to be outside, you're outside, and so you're living it up because you're outside, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean that is true. And like the whole hiking idea, I'm just like, "Ugh, I'm chubby, I'll get tired, like,
No, no,
and I'm
no.
just like,
I
everyone's like, that's
follow.
not true.
I follow these folks, these Instagram accounts. But one of them I think is called Unlikely Hikers, and it talks about how there's so much societal shaming of bodies when it comes to hiking or exercising and things. And literally, hiking, the definition is walking outside. That's it. There's no expectations of mileage. There's no expectations of what your incline of how, whether you're climbing a mountain in a day or
That's
what have you.
true, yeah.
If you are walking outside, you are hiking. That's
Well, I
it.
like that. If somebody sees me on the street and I'm like, what are you doing? I'm hiking.
Yes, you can.
I'll let you know how that works out. I'll probably be on someone's TikTok page. They'll be like, look at this crazy broad. She said she was hiking and she's walking in the suburbs. I'll be like, Jess told me to do it. She said she saw it online.
That's all
It's fine.
right. I'll stand by that.
Right? Like, hey, it's my definition. It's okay. Self care. Move on, people. Oh, I love it. No, I I love nature as well. Nature is huge. The sun is huge. We've joked about the sun, but it's true. Being one with the earth is huge. I kind of want to do, I don't know if you've heard of it, but probably since you're outdoorsy, is the grounding. Like, I want to go for a walk with no shoes.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, and just totally, like, take it in. I mean, here's me. I'm like, okay, well, I'll come home because I'll probably step in glass and have to go to the emergency room and get something, but I still want to do it. It still sounds, I mean, kind of like you said, it just sounds like everything around you is bigger than what you're dealing with. So it makes you feel at peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It lets me know this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just happy that there's no more snow because that takes away from the outdoorsiness and,
Oh, I love winter hiking. That doesn't sound fun, hiking in 10 degrees.
well, I mean, if hiking is now considered going outside and walking, then yes, I mean, I did hike this winter as well. So I'm one step ahead of a lot of people. I am rolling over here.
That's great.
So, trying to tie back into it, love that you're taking care of yourself still, dealing with a very demanding, field, because it is. It's demanding and it's emotional. And just hats off to you to be, it sounds like you found your balance. And if not, you've been able to manage what that balance could look like and what it will look like. And you've been able to make those adjustments to keep your mental health in a good place. But obviously it sounds really challenging. So, like, how do you continue to do what you do?
Mm-hmm. Um, so there is a book that perhaps folks have heard of called Just Mercy. There was a movie made based off the book Just Mercy. And Just Mercy was written by Brian Stevenson. And Brian Stevenson is the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, which is a organization dedicated to truth telling down in Montgomery, Alabama. They've got a absolutely to harken back to the fact that I'm a history nerd. They have an amazing museum, an absolutely amazing museum, which is called the Legacy Museum, and it is the only and first of its kind museum in the United States which actually tells an accurate history of slavery in this country. And he has been involved in all kinds of, he's a lawyer professionally, and he's been involved in all kinds of really great, important litigation regarding mass incarceration and race-based discrimination and stuff. So anyways, check out Brian Stevenson. He's a rock star. And Brian Stevenson speaks a lot about cultivate how in order for him to do this difficult work that he's done for decades, he has had to cultivate a practice of hope. And that he speaks about the importance of maintaining hope in the face of brutal truth. And so that has been something that's really that I continue to come back to in difficult moments. Is that so much of being able to continue on is doing just that, is being able to maintain hope in the face of brutal truth, because it is understandably and rightly so upsetting and concerning and angering for people to learn this history of the anti-violence movement, for example, or the history of mass incarceration in this country, or the history of the legacy of how colonization and genocide were very integral into how the mental health field came to be. And so when we learn these lived histories, it makes sense to be upset by that. It makes sense to be temporarily rendered hopeless by that, of how do we stand a chance of tomorrow being different. And so for me, I look to, for personally, because I'm a history nerd, I look to history, to the past for hope. That for me, and I know not everyone is like this necessarily, but when I see the history of, let's take that 1871 Alabama court case decision about a husband not being able to beat his wife anymore, and we trace legislation similar to that throughout the United States. It was only in the mid 90s. So within both of us, within our lifetime, we saw states still in 1994 and 1995 making spousal rape illegal. That it was still legal when we were born.
Yes.
That Kansas and Missouri and these different states, that they still had an exception, an exception that a man could rape his wife if they were married. And so for me, seeing, I can understand how that's like looking at history, it can feel really overwhelming, and certainly one can be left with this idea of, well, but we still have so far to go. And I think, though, that by looking at how far we've come in such a small amount of time, when you look at the entirety of human history, of the entirety of people living in communities with one another, we have made such progress in such a blip of time. That's really been how I've been able to continue to maintain hope in the face of brutal truth. I also think, though, that by being in the communities that I'm a part of, I'm involved in or I have been, I should say, right now, being in grad school. I'm taking a time out because I'm cultivating that practice of no. um, that I've been a part of the Racial Equity Institute Community Advisory Board, and showing up for racial justice, and the Cultural Competency Collective of Kansas City, and in these different spaces where I'm sharing space with people who are uh, working toward liberation and working toward racial justice. And someone shared a few years ago something with me that is also something that helps me to maintain hope in the face of brutal truth, which is that our country, the bedrock of this country, was created. It wasn't inherent to our society. It was created upon the legacy and the institutionalization of colonization and genocide and enslavement. And those were purposeful decisions, that then institutions were purposefully, intentionally built, which means that necessarily that means that something else can also be built. Something else, an alternative to all of this, can be built, because none of it's inherent. None of it was the way that it was. All of it was created, which means it can be destroyed and it can be rebuilt into something new. And so that also, keeping that in mind, of the fact that none of this is how it has to be. It might be how it is, and it is how it is, but that's not how it has to be. Um, Also helps me maintain hope. It's overwhelming at times, but generally speaking.
Yeah. But we all need those things to hold on to, and like what gets us through. And it's a lot of us, as simple as it is just have that hope that we can make a change, we can find a change, we can be the change,
Mhm.
and however that looks is up to discretion, but we find hope in little things and big things and just anything that helps us move forward. So no, I really like I thought, I like the simplicity of the idea of hope.
Mhm.
That's enough drive for a lot of people. and that's a big drive in this community as well. Just fighting mental illness is, being hopeful and staying hopeful for whatever you're going through, whether that be, anxiety or depression, anything, is just keeping that hope, because we need that. We need to hold on to hope, and we need to have faith in what we're going through, what we're going to continue going through, and what we're going to get through. And we need more people like you, Jess, like seriously, to be able to be a survivor, work in the field you're surviving in, and be like that light for a lot of people to keep that hope that sometimes they don't see. So that's huge.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to really like wrap it up, like what guidance would you give to other survivors who want to get involved in the violence movement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say to not let folks stop you from getting involved. There are so many different ways that folks can get involved in the anti-violence movement, both formally and informally. I think there is such excuse me, I think there is such power in survivors organizing their communities. I can think of throughout the course of my career of different families of survivors or different survivors themselves who have organized different events to try to raise awareness or to try to help other people. And I think that it's truly amazing, the amount of people who I have worked with over the years who are survivors who, excuse me, in the midst of the most difficult, scary, um, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching situations, that they, and I think, and this is part of what also sustains me in this work, is seeing just the, compassion of survivors. That even when they are going through it, of still thinking about how can I help other people is
Yeah.
absolutely, it's beautiful, and I'm honored to when I've witnessed that. Uh, but yeah, I would say just you, and if this is what you want to do, take care of yourself. It's going to be vital, critical to your survival, to practice and cultivate a um, self care and knowing what drives you and knowing what your why is and understanding. It's taken me a really long time, and it's not perfect. I think we're always learning. I don't know that we ever 100% get a gold star saying that we're great at any of this. um, but I wish.
Especially when you don't like bubble baths, but
but I think that just oh knowing that other people's stuff is not for you to take on has probably been one of the hardest lessons I've learned. And trusting survivors. That's, I guess, guidance I would give to really anyone who wants to get involved in the anti-violence movement, that when we say that people are the experts of their lives, when we say that survivors are the experts of their lives, we mean that literally. I think that sometimes people who work professionally in the mental health field or in the anti-violence field, that we think of that as being one of our like philosophical tenets or philosophical principles, and we think about how that has to do with empowerment theory, and strength-based theories and these different theories and things. And like, no, we mean that practically. We mean that for real.
not for fake.
Yeah, because when we believe that, and this is something, because I've been training people now for years and years about safety planning, that I have never been proven wrong with what I'm about to say. That I have safety planned with who knows how many people, hundreds and hundreds probably at this point, um, of survivors who, I'm sitting there looking for answers and trying to come up with brainstorming questions and resources and information, and I just feel at a loss. And we've gone kind of, I've gone through all of my questions and I can't think of anything else. And we have to end the phone call, and then we touch base the next day or days later or something. And always that person figured it out without me. Always. And it just speaks to how they are the expert. And no amount of training or education or lived experience, like they are the experts. They have the answers. They know what questions to ask. And when we actually, when we actually believe that, I think that can be incredibly healing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, again, it just goes back to oh, she's choking again. Don't pass out on me. We're almost done. No, it just goes back to, again, what can we resonate with? And we resonate with those that are living experience of what they've talked about and how relatable those people are and how powerful their stories are and how important it is to have survivors willing to speak up
Yeah.
and to just be involved. And it's huge. It's just the amount of people that I've met in this community so far that do podcasts as well that are suffering from mental health issues, that's what we need. Because again, if we're not doing it, who's going to do it? Joe Schmo, who's never battled anxiety or doesn't even know what a panic attack is. I'm not going to listen to you. That's the reality of the situation. I'll listen to what you have to say, but I'd rather tune in and listen to somebody who is going through it, living it, have lived it, continues to live it, whatever that looks like. That's who I'm picking for my team, and I'm glad that you've harped on that as well, because that's such a powerful message to give to people, because I feel like there's a certain extent of us that are survivors that feel like you said, kind of shameful because you feel like you're invalid because of what you survived, when really you're the most valuable. 100%.
Yeah. Agreed.
I'm glad you're not choking anymore. I was getting nervous for a second. I was like, I just do podcasts. I don't know CPR, and I'm not certified in really much of anything.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's powerful. It's great what you do, and it's powerful, but we need to continue to, like we've said, take care of yourself, continue to be the incredible advocate you are. And I just really appreciate you coming on here and telling your story. That's what I've opened up this platform for, people to tell their story, to tell what they're surviving, and just give us a glimpse of somebody else's life. And if it's relatable, great. If it's not, hopefully me and Jess made you laugh at some point. Again, she doesn't like bubble baths, so I don't know what to tell you there. But Jess, where can my viewers connect with you?
Yeah, I have a Instagram page. My handle is Jess for Justice. So that's JESS, and then four is spelled out FOR, and then Justice. That's probably the best way. Or I also have a website, but it's not as interactive. But it does tell you more about me. It's jessharman.com.
Awesome. Like I said, I really, really appreciate you coming on here. And hopefully we connected with somebody feels a little bit better from this, and we're not going to push that panic button. We're going to figure it out. Thanks again, Jess.
Yeah, thank you.